New information tonight on a story you almost have to see to believe.
That's right. Flames shooting from faucets inside a home in Fort Lupton.
It seemed like such a strange and unusual phenomena. Water so contaminated, it catches on fire.
Shock is one word for it. Terror is probably more effective.
And now we've learned she isn't the only one.
It just like popped and caught on fire. And
Renee McClure discovered her water is also flammable after she saw our story last night.
I want to know that we're safe.
Renee worries her family has been drinking the contaminated water for years.
Everywhere I went, it was the same story.
He says, you see this big dark spot? That's brain damage.
Huge banks of compressor stations in people's backyards.
I can't stay here too long.
Wells drilled right across the street from people's houses.
Yeah, get a picture of the pretty flowers over there.
Poison streams in Arkansas.
Boy, they're making a beautiful, beautiful piece of country and turn it into just a big trash dump.
Land farms where toxic sludge from waste pits were right next to residential communities.
And the dust blows, the toxic waste fumes blow on them.
Too many stories to recount. Everyone had the same look of worry.
We can't keep going like we are. I've heard that the White House power plants is supposed to go natural gas, and we tell them don't do it.
The sheer scope of this massive drilling campaign boggled the mind. They started out west, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and in the south, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama. 450,000 wells. The Energy Task Force, headed by Vice President Dick Cheney, asked the BLM in 2001 to find ways to open new federal lands to oil and gas leasing, our public trust, your land and mine. You can camp anywhere on BLM land because it belongs to you, the public. The BLM's stated mission is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the public lands for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. And in what some call the greatest transfer of public lands to private hands in history, Dick Cheney persuaded the BLM to lease millions of acres to gas companies for exploration and drilling. The towns of Rifle, Rulison, Parachute, Silt, and Battlement Mesa were all part of one of the first populated areas to get a major gas rush. In less than a decade, the area became rapidly industrialized, with over 5,000 wells drilled. So going to Garfield County is like looking into the future of any area slated for drilling. It's also the subject of the first preliminary study on the health effects of gas drilling. 7 medical researchers from the University of Colorado studied the air and the water, finding acute problems from toxic emissions from gas development. In 2004, the EPA was investigating water contamination incidents due to hydraulic fracturing across the country. But a panel rejected the inquiry, stating that although hazardous materials were being injected underground, EPA did not need to investigate.
They came out with the patently ridiculous conclusion. They had showed it was toxic and then said it wasn't a risk. It made no sense, and only in an Orwellian world would you accept that.
From 1995 until 2000, when he became vice president, Dick Cheney was the CEO of Halliburton. One of the first things he did when he became vice president was to form what was known as the Energy Task Force. They met up to 40 times with industry leaders. They only met once with members from environmental groups. The Energy Task Force and a $100 million lobbying effort on behalf of the industry were significant in the passage of what's called the Halliburton loophole to the Safe Drinking Water Act, which authorizes oil and gas drillers exclusively to inject known hazardous materials unchecked directly into or adjacent to underground drinking water supplies. They were also exempt from the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Superfund Law, and about a dozen other environmental and democratic regulations. And when the 2005 energy bill cleared away all the restrictions, companies like Encana, Williams, Cabot Oil and Gas, and Chesapeake began to use the new Halliburton technology, and they began the largest and most extensive domestic gas drilling campaign in history, now occupying 34 states. The method of gas drilling they use is called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. It blasts a mix of water and chemicals 8,000 feet into the ground. The fracking itself is like a mini earthquake. The intense pressure breaks apart the rock and frees up the gas. In order to frack, you need some fracking fluid, a mix of over 596 chemicals. From the unpronounceable to the unknown to the too well-known, the brew is full of corrosion inhibitors, gelants, drilling additives, biocides, shale control inhibitors, liquid breaker aids, viscosifiers, liquid gel concentrates. Because of the exemptions, fracking chemicals are considered proprietary, like the special sauce for a Big Mac or the secret formula for Coca-Cola. The only reason we know anything about the fracking chemicals is because of the work of Theo Colborn. By chasing down trucks, combing through material safety data sheets, and collecting samples, Theo has identified 596 different chemicals in 900 chemical products.
I go out and I talk to the bosses, you know, the men who are overlooking what's going on, and even their supervisors, the public relation people that talk to us from the industry. They are so surprised. They look at me as if I'm crazy when I ask them, well, where are they mixing in the chemicals now? Oh, we're not using any chemicals. Well, if we are, they're safe. Even the bosses don't know what they're telling those men to handle. And once the public hears the story, and they'll say, well, why aren't we out there monitoring? We can't monitor until we know what they're using. There's no way to monitor. You can't.
You're saying it's the industry itself should be proving it and not the people.
This is America. We shouldn't be assuming that corporations can keep a secret, especially when they're practicing in our backyard. So the onus should be on the industry to prove to the government that their practice is benign and not that assumption. What you could be picking up from these citizens is what we should be investigating, but we're not. We're still asleep at the wheel. And don't assume since Obama got elected that something's changed at the EPA yet in that regard. You know, when the president says to its bureaucracy, don't investigate, expedite things for industry, we do those jobs well, too.
Every environmental law we wrote to protect public health is ignored.
Texas. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. The Barnett Shale. The place all of this started.
We've now got about 10,000 wells around the city of Fort Worth. We now know that emissions from this sector are greater than the accumulated emissions of all passenger vehicles, all the cars and trucks in Dallas and Fort Worth.
Pipelines are designed to have this release where they're shooting natural gas into the air. Of course, they tell you that this all shoots up goes straight to the moon and there's none of it lingering around.
He commissioned his own air study. The results read sort of like the back of a pamphlet that you don't want to pick up at the American Cancer Society. Study found, and I quote, amazing and very high levels of known and suspected human carcinogens and neurotoxins. Benzene in the air was at 55 times the public health standard. Carbon disulfide was at 107 times the health standard. The report states that acute impacts to health will occur with these concentrations of chemicals in the air. The cancer and neurotoxins will also have an impact over the long term. If the cumulative air emissions in Texas were huge, what were the cumulative water impacts like?
This whole area produces, and the groundwater is contaminated from the production, from the drilling, from the old pits in this entire area, contaminated with a lot of the heavy metals like barium, which is the weighting agent in drilling fluids, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, lead.
And this part of Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico, just to the south, has been receiving oil and gas waste for 60 years. 1/3 of all the natural gas in America passes through the Henry Hub. This is where we take all the byproducts, all the wastewater, throw it out to sea, hope it doesn't come back. During the hurricanes of Rita and Katrina, it did come back.
And all of those chemicals are there in the tanks, in the flood walls, in the heater treaters, in the storage tanks. But there's no protection from the storm surge. Everything that you see below an elevation of 6 feet, all that contamination, all those products got washed into the environment.
It's the same type of thing over and over and over. You've lost more than what you've gained. What have you gained? A dollar bill cannot bring back what they've taken away.
I asked my anonymous friend if she'd also talked to the DEP.
The bottom line is what matters. We're not going to allow folks who have had their water contaminated as a result of drilling to sit there and have to drink that kind of water. The folks on this side of the camera have to make some real decisions in the real world. And until somebody comes up with, I guess, the hydrogen economy, I don't have perfect answers to all these things. And I have to make trade-offs. And those trade-offs recognize that you're often taking 2 steps forward and perhaps 1 step back. And that's a lot of the decision-making that goes on right now.
Just a few short months after this interview, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection suffered the worst budget cuts in history, amounting to over 350 full-time positions being eliminated and 25% of their total budget cut. In the midst of what could be the largest natural gas drilling campaign in Pennsylvania history.
But so far, we're not on duty. We're not present as a government agency to answer your legitimate questions, and we must be directed to.